I never thought a marriage could end, with a door closing right in your face. That night it was drizzling in Houston. Not heavy, but cold enough to seep into my bones. I stood on the porch, my son in one arm, the other gripping the railing because my left leg still hadn't healed from the accident. Then, the door opened. Daniel stood there. Not angry, not shouting. Just distant. "Emily, maybe you should stay at your dad's for a while." It sounded like a suggestion, but his eyes said something else. Behind him, Jenna stepped closer. She didn't say a word, just rested her hand on his waist. Gently, but enough for me to understand. I had already been replaced. I didn't even have time to react. The door shut. A quiet sound, but it felt like something inside me cracked. Have you ever wondered what hurts more? Being betrayed? Or realizing you ignored the signs for too long? I stood there in the rain, holding a crying baby, staring at a house that was no longer mine. And I thought that was the worst moment of my life. I was wrong. If you've ever believed things couldn't get any lower, stay with me. Because what happened next was even harder to believe. Just minutes later, a car pulled up in front of me, and the real secret about my family began to surface. The headlights cut through the rain before I could even wipe my face. An old pickup truck slowed to a stop just a few feet away. The engine rumbled low, steady, familiar. I didn't need to see the driver to know who it was. "Emily?" My father's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I froze. He stepped out, boots hitting the wet pavement, eyes scanning everything in seconds. My shaking hands, my torn bag on the ground, my son pressed against my chest, and my leg. He didn't ask what happened right away. He just looked at me like he was putting together a story no one had told him yet. "Why are you out here?" he asked quietly. "Where's your house?" That word, your house, almost broke me. I swallowed. "It's not mine anymore." For a moment, the rain was the only thing making noise. Then he nodded once, not shocked, not confused, just certain. He took off his coat and wrapped it around my shoulders, then gently lifted my son into his arms like he'd done 100 times before. His hands were calm, but his jaw tightened in a way I hadn't seen since I was a kid. "Get in the truck," he said. "You're coming home." Home. I hadn't used that word for him in years. As we drove through the quiet streets, I kept glancing at him. Just anyone else. He looked like what he'd always been. A simple man, retired early, living in a modest house on the edge of town. No fancy suits, no big titles. Just routine, quiet, predictable. That's what I believed too, until that night. Because as we pulled into his driveway, his phone buzzed once. He glanced at the screen, and something in his expression changed. Not anger, not panic. Control. He answered with just one sentence, voice low and steady. "Start the process." I didn't understand what that meant, but the way the air suddenly felt heavier told me something had already begun. That night, I sat at my father's kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug I couldn't feel. The house smelled like old wood and coffee, familiar, steady. My son had finally fallen asleep in the next room, but inside me, nothing was calm. "Tell me everything," my father said. So I did. I told him how Daniel's late nights turned into silence, then distance. How Jenna started showing up to help with finances, smiling just enough to seem harmless. How my mother-in-law slowly stopped speaking to me and started praising her instead. I told him about the fall, the cracked bone, the way I moved slower, needed help, became inconvenient. And then I told him about tonight, how my clothes were already packed, how my documents had disappeared, how the door locked behind me while my son was still crying. I expected anger, maybe shouting. But my father didn't interrupt once. He just listened. And somehow, that was worse. When I finished, the room felt too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your chest. "You paid for that house too?" he asked. I nodded. Most of it. Years of work, savings, everything. He leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing. Not in doubt, but in calculation. "And your name is still on the documents?" "Yes, it should be." He held my gaze for a long second. Then he stood up. Slowly. No rush. No hesitation. He walked to a drawer, pulled out a thin laptop, and set it on the table. When he opened it, the glow from the screen lit up his face. And for the first time that night, I didn't see my father as I knew him. I saw someone else. Folders appeared. Files. Contracts. Names I didn't recognize. Then I saw one line, and my breath caught. Primary Ownership Control. Hayes Development Group. I looked up at him, my voice barely there. "Dad, what is this?" He didn't answer right away. He just clicked one more file and turned the screen toward me. And in that moment, everything I thought I understood about my marriage, about that house, about him, started to collapse. The screen didn't just show documents, it showed years, quiet decisions I never noticed, safeguards I never questioned. "The house was registered under your name and Daniel's," my father said calmly, "but the controlling interest stayed with my company." I stared at him. "You mean he never actually owned it?" "He had access," my father replied, "because you trusted him." That word hit harder than anything else. Trusted. And suddenly, the past didn't feel distant anymore. It felt sharp, like I was reliving it all at once. I saw Daniel holding my hand the day we signed the papers, promising we were building something together. I heard my mother-in-law bragging to her friends about her son's house, while I stayed quiet, not wanting to embarrass him. I remembered wiring money late at night, telling myself it was for our future. But the truth? I had been financing my own replacement. My father clicked through more files, financial statements, transfer logs, names tied to accounts I didn't recognize, until I did. Jenna. Over and over again. Payments. Consulting fees. Operational support. Amounts that didn't make sense. "Daniel's company is one of our investments," my father said. "We monitor irregularities." My chest tightened. "You knew?" I knew enough to wait. Wait. That word chilled me. "How long?" I asked. He didn't answer directly, just closed the laptop halfway, his expression unreadable. Long enough to see what kind of man he chose to be. The room felt colder. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the silence it left behind was heavier than the storm. I thought everything had already fallen apart tonight. But sitting there, looking at those files, I realized something far worse. This wasn't the end of what Daniel had done. It was just the part that had finally been uncovered. The next morning felt too quiet. No rain, no tension in the air. Just sunlight slipping through my father's kitchen window like nothing had changed. But something had. My father didn't say much over breakfast. Neither did I. Every few seconds his phone buzzed, and each time he only glanced at it. Calm. Controlled. Then he stood. "Get ready," he said. "You need to see this." "See what?" He didn't answer. 40 minutes later, we stepped into a glass building in downtown Houston, Daniel's office. People were already whispering. Not loudly, just enough for you to feel it before you heard it. We walked past reception, straight to the elevators. No one stopped us. That should have been my first warning. When the doors opened on the top floor, the atmosphere changed. Quiet. Heavy. Like something had already happened, and everyone knew it except me. My father pushed open a conference room door. Daniel was inside. So was Jenna. And around them, 5 executives, a legal team, and a screen already lit up. Daniel looked up, and for the first time since I'd known him, he didn't look confident. He looked scared. "Sit," my father said to him. Not loud, not aggressive, just final. The screen changed. Numbers appeared, transfers, dates, accounts, then audio. Jenna's voice, clear, unmistakable. "Just move a little from the marketing fund. No one checks that closely." Daniel's voice followed, hesitant. "What if they notice?" "They won't. Not if you keep it small." The room went still. I felt my chest tighten, not from anger, but from something colder. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't pressure. This was a choice. Repeated. Planned. My father stepped forward, placing a single document on the table. "You were promoted because of me," he said quietly, "trusted because of her." Daniel's lips trembled. "I can explain." "No," my father cut in. "You already did." He signed the paper. One stroke. And just like that. "Effective immediately," someone said, voice firm. "Your position is terminated. Legal proceedings will follow." Daniel didn't move. Jenna didn't speak. And I stood there, realizing something that hurt more than everything else combined. I hadn't just lost a husband. I had been living with a man I never truly knew. I thought I would feel satisfied watching everything fall apart. I didn't. A few days later, Daniel came to see me. No suit, no confidence. Just a man who had run out of excuses. Jenna wasn't there anymore. Neither was his mother. "Emily, please," he said, his voice breaking. "I lost everything." I looked at him. Really looked this time. Not as my husband. Not as the man I built a life with. Just a stranger. "I did too," I said quietly. "A long time ago." There was nothing left to argue about. No anger left to carry. Only a decision. I handed him the document. A full admission. Everything they had done, signed, recorded, finished. In exchange, I wouldn't drag it through court. He hesitated, then signed. That was the last time I saw him up close. Months later, I stood in front of a small group of women, sharing my story for the first time. My son was laughing somewhere behind me. My legs still ached some days, but I was standing, on my own, and for the first time, it felt steady. Life doesn't always break you all at once. Sometimes it does it quietly, through small compromises, ignored instincts, and the slow erosion of your voice. And often, the hardest truth to accept isn't that someone hurt you, it's that you stayed long enough to let it happen. But here's what I've learned. Strength isn't in how loudly you fight back. It's in how clearly you choose yourself. When everything inside you is still hurting, forgiveness doesn't mean letting people return, and kindness doesn't mean lowering your boundaries. And there comes a moment, different for everyone, when you realize that peace is more valuable than proving a point. That walking away isn't weakness, it's clarity. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is rebuild a life so full, so grounded, so honest, that the people who once broke you no longer recognize the person you've become.